The knocking in the night. It was a lonely, stormy evening in the small town of Black Hollow. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, casting an eerie shadow over the quiet countryside. Rain tapped persistently on the windows, and lightning flickered, casting brief flashes of light over the towering pines surrounding the isolated house. It was the kind of night that begged for quiet, with only the rustling leaves and occasional distant howl breaking the silence. Amelia had always loved these kinds of nights. Recently married, she and her husband had just moved into their dream home, a cozy cottage nestled at the edge of Black Hollow's dense woods. Her husband worked the night shift, often leaving her alone with her thoughts. Normally, she'd spend these nights curled up with a good book, but tonight, she felt a strange, unshakable unease. There was something about the night that felt different. The wind sounded sharper, almost like it was whispering something just beyond her hearing. She shrugged it off as nerves, though deep down, she felt as though she wasn't truly alone. Around midnight, just as Amelia was beginning to nod off, she heard a light, almost polite knock on her front door. Startled, she sat up and listened. No one should be out here, especially at this hour. The nearest neighbor was a good 10-minute drive away, and her friends and family knew not to stop by unannounced, especially so late. The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent, growing louder with each pause. She tried to ignore it, hoping it was just the sound of a loose branch hitting the side of the house, but something about it seemed deliberate, too intentional to be mere coincidence. Her heart pounded as she cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. But when she looked, no one was there. A chill ran down her spine as she stepped back, her mind racing. Was someone trying to scare her? Her instincts told her to call her husband, but she didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, she locked the door, turned off the lights, and tried to ignore the nagging fear gnawing at her. Unable to sleep, Amelia decided to distract herself by inspecting the rest of the house, just to make sure everything was secure. She walked from room to room, double-checking locks and feeling slightly foolish. Yet the sense of being watched never left her. As she walked, she noticed things out of place. A picture frame tilted, a window slightly cracked open. She felt unsettled, but chalked it up to her overactive imagination. The road to her cottage was hidden and isolated, lined with thick trees that cast strange shadows under the moonlight. Black Hollow was known for its ghost stories and eerie happenings, something her husband had always dismissed as just stories. But tonight, Amelia was starting to wonder if those stories held a grain of truth. A sudden noise broke her train of thought, a loud creak from the hallway. She turned sharply, heart pounding. There, in the dim light, a shadow shifted, vanishing around the corner. Convinced someone was inside, she raced to grab her phone. As Amelia dialed, she heard another knock, louder and more aggressive this time, echoing through the quiet night. She could feel her pulse throb at her ears, fear settling like a stone in her stomach. The knocking was relentless, each thud rattling the door as if it were being hit with a forceful hand. "Please, stop," she whispered, voice trembling. Her phone connected, and she told her husband about the knocking. He tried to reassure her, reminding her of the deadbolts and telling her to stay put. But the longer the knocking went on, the more frantic and desperate it sounded. Determined to put an end to the terror, she decided to confront whoever or whatever was causing the disturbance. She flipped on the porch light and threw open the door, only to find no one. Her yard lay empty, drenched in moonlight and rain, with only the distant woods staring back. Just as she was about to shut the door, Amelia noticed a muddy footprint on the porch, fresh and pointed toward her door. Her throat tightened as she realized it wasn't her own, nor her husband's. She stepped back, eyes wide with fear. She could hear faint footsteps circling the house, soft but unmistakable. They were moving closer, each step deliberate and menacing, like someone trying to taunt her. She slammed the door shut, locking it tight, and pressed her back against it, every nerve in her body on edge. She called the police, voice shaking, and they promised to send someone right away. But with each passing second, the footsteps seemed to grow louder, closer until she could hear them right outside her bedroom window. When she dared to look, she saw the faint outline of a figure, standing impossibly still, as if waiting. When the police arrived, they searched the property, but found nothing, no footprints, no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone lurking around. Amelia felt a surge of relief, though her nerves were still frayed. She explained the events in detail, but even the officers seemed skeptical, hinting that it could have been an animal or her imagination. Days passed, and Amelia tried to move on, but the experience left her with a nagging sense of dread. She began to research the area and discovered an unsettling history. Black Hollow had once been home to a man who was rumored to lurk outside people's homes at night, knocking on their doors until they answered. Those who ignored the knocking claimed to see his shadow lingering just beyond their windows. The man was believed to have disappeared years ago, but sightings of his shadow continued to be reported. Amelia's unease grew as she delved deeper into the town's history. The man, once a respected community member, had lost his mind after the death of his wife, becoming a recluse who terrorized his neighbors in his grief. His ghost was rumored to haunt those who dared to live on his land, knocking endlessly on doors and windows, seeking entry to a place he could never return. One night, the knocking resumed, more insistent and desperate than before. When she dared to look through the peephole, she saw a face staring back, a hollow-eyed man, pale and ghastly, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear. Amelia realized she had to face the spirit to somehow end the haunting. She spoke aloud, begging it to leave her in peace, her voice quivering. "Please, if you're there, go back to where you belong." The knocking stopped abruptly, and the figure outside disappeared into the night. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, just as she thought it was over, she heard a final deafening knock from inside her own home. The next day, Amelia packed her things and left Black Hollow for good, vowing never to return. But the haunting stayed with her, and every time she heard a knock at her new home, she couldn't help but feel a jolt of fear. One night, as she drifted off to sleep, she heard it again, a soft, rhythmic knock echoing from within her walls, as if reminding her that some things, once invited, never truly leave. Did this story give you chills? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more terrifying tales. The call from inside the house. It was a damp, overcast night in Black Hollow. The fog lingered thickly over the small town, curling around trees and creeping across empty streets. In the distance, the faint glow of street lamps barely pierced the murky darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the mist. A heavy silence lay over the neighborhood, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the eerie call of an owl. Amelia had been looking forward to a quiet weekend alone. As a graphic designer, she rarely got the chance to unwind, and the house-sitting gig for a friend seemed like the perfect escape from her bustling city life. She had just settled in, appreciating the solitude of the spacious house on the edge of town. It was older, with creaky floors and dim lighting, but cozy, and Amelia welcomed the chance to relax. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange feeling crept over her. It was subtle at first, a faint sense that something was watching her. Dismissing it as nerves, she locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and laughed at herself for being paranoid. She reminded herself it was just an old house, nothing more. Amelia was halfway through a movie marathon, curled up on the couch when her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Unknown number. Are you alone? Startled, she frowned, assuming it was a prank. She typed a quick response, "Who is this?" and set her phone aside, trying to refocus on her movie. Moments later, the phone chimed again. Unknown number. I'm watching you. Her stomach dropped, and a chill ran down her spine. Amelia's fingers trembled as she typed back, "Whoever this is, it's not funny." She received no reply, but a strange sensation washed over her, making the hairs on her arms stand up. Could it just be a prank? Or was someone really outside watching? Taking a deep breath, Amelia decided to investigate. She checked the windows, but saw nothing except fog swirling in the dim glow of the porch light. Outside, everything was still. Steeling herself, she moved to the back door, peering out into the dark backyard. Just as she was about to turn away, she heard a faint tapping sound, a rhythmic knock. It seemed to come from somewhere nearby, perhaps the back of the house. She held her breath, listening, but the sound stopped just as suddenly as it had begun. Amelia's mind raced. Was someone out there? She thought of calling the police, but hesitated, not wanting to overreact. Surely it was just her imagination, spurred on by the unsettling text. As the night wore on, strange events began to pile up. Lights flickered without explanation, and Amelia began hearing soft footsteps in the hall, as if someone were pacing just outside her door. Every time she checked, the hallway was empty, but the tension was building. Her nerves frayed, and the rational part of her mind started to lose ground to fear. Desperate for an explanation, she rummaged through her friend's belongings, hoping to find something to make sense of the strange happenings. In a drawer, she found an old photo album filled with black and white pictures of the house's former residents. The photos were eerie, with stiff-faced people staring blankly at the camera. One picture in particular caught her eye, a young girl, her face blurred, standing alone in the corner of a dim room. Feeling a presence behind her, Amelia spun around, half expecting to see someone standing in the room. But she was alone, or so she thought. Suddenly, the phone rang. Heart pounding, she answered it. There was no response at first, just static on the other end. Then, a voice, chilling and whispery, spoke. Voice, I'm in the house with you. The line went dead. Amelia's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She felt trapped, panic creeping in as she struggled to keep calm. This was no prank. Someone or something was in the house. Determined to confront whatever was haunting her, Amelia searched for answers in the old house. She scoured every room, checking under beds, behind doors, and in closets. In the attic, she discovered a dusty old box filled with letters, yellowed and brittle with age. They spoke of a tragedy of family who once lived in the house had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Intrigued but terrified, Amelia read on, piecing together a grim story of betrayal, revenge, and restless spirits. Could these spirits be haunting her now, angry at being forgotten? As Amelia uncovered more about the house's past, the hauntings became more intense. Whispers filled the air, shadows moved without reason, and the tapping sounds returned, louder and more insistent. She realized that the entity was growing stronger, feeding off her fear. Finally, Amelia stumbled upon a journal belonging to the family's youngest daughter. It detailed strange occurrences that had happened to her as well, as if history was repeating itself. The final entry read, "He's inside. He never left." Goosebumps rose on her skin. Was this ghostly presence the same one tormenting her now? With no escape, Amelia prepared herself for a final showdown. Armed with only her wits and a sense of desperation, she followed the noises to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and a nauseating scent filled her nostrils. At the bottom of the stairs, a shadowy figure waited. She could barely make out its features, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Heart pounding, she fought to remain calm, confronting the presence with every ounce of courage she had left. The figure advanced, its whispers filling her mind, leaving her dizzy with terror. Just as Amelia thought she couldn't bear any more, the entity seemed to waver. She clutched a trinket she'd found in the attic, a locket that had belonged to the young girl. Holding it up, she called out to the spirit, pleading for it to find peace. For a moment, the shadow paused and vanished, leaving the basement eerily silent. Amelia stumbled upstairs, drained but relieved, feeling as though she'd finally rid the house of its hauntings. But as she left the house and glanced back one last time, her phone vibrated with a new message. Unknown number. I'm still here. Thank you for listening to the call from inside the house. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below about your theories or favorite part. And don't forget to subscribe for more haunting tales like this. And remember, sometimes the things that go bump in the night may be closer than you think. The Stranger in the Attic. It was a cold, blustery night in the quiet town of Rivermill, where the shadows seemed to stretch just a little longer, lingering under the moon's pale light. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling the shutters on old, creaky houses, and carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and freshly turned soil. Tucked away on the edge of town, surrounded by towering trees, was an aging Victorian house, its exterior worn, its once vibrant paint faded and peeling. Megan had moved into the house only a few weeks prior, drawn to its charm and history. She was a writer, fascinated by old stories and the secrets houses like this one held. She had felt an instant connection to it, as if the house had chosen her. But tonight, as the wind whispered through the walls, Megan couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been creeping over her. It was as though the house was alive, watching her every move, waiting for something. The first few nights had been peaceful. Megan felt inspired, enjoying the solitude and using the quiet to fuel her writing. But then, strange things started happening. One night, as she was preparing to go to bed, she heard a faint, rhythmic creaking from above. At first, she brushed it off as the old house settling. But the creaking grew louder, more insistent, like footsteps moving back and forth directly above her bedroom. Megan's heart raced as she realized the noise was coming from the attic. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the wind. But the following night, the noise returned louder, clearer. The footsteps seemed to pace back and forth, pausing every so often, as if whoever was up there was contemplating their next move. A chill ran down her spine as she thought, was someone actually in the attic? Unable to bear it any longer, Megan decided to investigate. She climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. Each creak of the stairs seemed to echo in the silence, amplifying her anxiety. The attic door was stiff, resisting as she pushed it open, and a cold draft hit her as she stepped inside. The attic was dark and cluttered with old furniture covered in dusty sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, and shadows that seemed to twist and shift in the corners. She scanned the room with her flashlight, heart pounding, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to leave, she spotted something peculiar, a small, dusty mirror propped against the wall, its glass slightly cracked. As she moved closer, she thought she saw a faint outline of a figure reflected in the mirror, standing just behind her. She spun around, her flashlight sweeping across the room, but there was no one there. Shaking her head, she decided it was just a trick of the light. But the uneasy feeling lingered. The noises continued, growing louder and more frequent each night. The footsteps turned into whispers, soft and unintelligible, but undeniably there. Megan started seeing strange shapes out of the corner of her eyeshadows that seemed to move, lurking just beyond her line of sight. She tried to go about her days as usual, but sleep was becoming elusive, her mind haunted by the sounds and shadows that filled the house each night. She found herself growing obsessed with the attic, wondering if she'd missed something on her first visit. Determined to find answers, she began asking around the town about her house's history. Locals spoke of a family who had once lived there, a tragedy that had left the house abandoned for decades. Rumors of a spirit trapped in the attic, a stranger who had taken up residence in the shadows, began to surface. Megan's curiosity deepened, but so did her fear. One night, the activity reached a terrifying peak. Megan was jolted awake by the sound of loud, pounding footsteps above her. This time, there was no mistaking it, someone was in the attic. She grabbed her flashlight and, heart racing, crept up the stairs. The attic door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Steeling herself, she pushed it open and shone her flashlight inside. The beam of light caught something horrifying, a figure, barely visible in the darkness, crouched in the corner. Its face was obscured, but Megan could see its eyes dark, hollow, and watching her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. She stumbled back, letting out a gasp, and the figure vanished, leaving her standing alone in the empty room. Her hands trembled as she backed away, closing the attic door tightly behind her. She knew now that she wasn't alone. Someone or something was sharing the house with her. Haunted by the encounter, Megan decided to delve deeper into the house's past. She found old newspaper clippings detailing the strange disappearance of a man who had reportedly been squatting in the attic decades ago. The townspeople had suspected him of being mentally unstable, but no one knew what had happened to him after the family moved out. His belongings had remained in the attic, untouched, as though waiting for his return. As she continued her research, Megan discovered that others in town had seen strange figures in the attic window, flickering lights and shadows that shouldn't be there. Some claimed the man's spirit was still there, trapped and restless. Others believed it was something far darker, an entity that had latched onto the house itself. One evening, Megan stumbled upon an old journal hidden in the attic. It belonged to the man who had lived there, its pages filled with ramblings about a presence he had felt in the house, a dark, malevolent force that he believed was feeding off his fear. The final entry sent a chill down her spine. It wants me to stay. It won't let me leave. The realization hit her. Whatever was in the attic wasn't just a ghost. It was something older, something sinister, trapping anyone who stayed in the house for too long. She had to find a way out before it was too late. Desperate to escape, Megan made one final attempt to confront the entity. She climbed the stairs to the attic, armed with nothing but her flashlight and a resolve to free herself. The attic felt colder than ever, the air thick with a suffocating pressure. The figure appeared again, its form becoming clearer. Megan saw the twisted expression on its face, heard the whispers that filled the room, pleading with her, warning her. But there was something else, a presence behind the figure, a shadow even darker, moving closer. Realizing she couldn't defeat it, Megan turned and fled, feeling the entity's cold breath on her neck as she raced down the stairs. She knew she couldn't stay here another night. Megan left the house that night, never looking back. She managed to find another place to stay, vowing to warn others about the danger lurking in the attic. But as she unpacked in her new apartment, she felt an unsettling presence, a cold chill that wrapped around her like an old, familiar shadow. When she glanced at the mirror on the wall, she froze. There, reflected just behind her, was the figure from the attic, watching her with those same hollow eyes. Thank you for listening to The Stranger in the Attic. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Remember, some places hold on to more than memories. They hold on to you.